Hi all, I have another amazing game to show you today. Stockfish, the version as of 27th of January 2019 against Leela ID 32742, so one of the later 30 networks, which is also currently playing in the TSET Cup. So these are the two very interesting engine competitions at the moment you can follow. So let's see, Stockfish playing white in this game, the opening book, and this is in the bullet brawl, so it's a 1 minute with a 2 second increment, so very fast and furious intuition kind of test for engines. Stockfish plays d4, the opening book. We have this kind of semi-Slav triangle formation. Queen c2 now is played as part of the opening book. Knight h5, bishop g3. So here the opening book ends, and Leela does snap up that dark square bishop. So clearly this leaves this bishop without a counterpart. Can it actually be useful later? The other thing to note, dynamically white's got pressure on the h-file which needs to be addressed immediately. So how to address that issue? That is a price to pay for taking that bishop. Well, we have g6. It turns out here that maybe h6 is more controversial. For example, g4 with an idea of g5 using that pinned pawn. Say a6, knight bd2, say b6 and now g5 here. Bishop takes g5. White can play something like this, which is quite interesting, luring the queen away, queen c6 hitting the rook, and queen d6. And this could be fairly annoying for black. White has a small edge here. There is quite significant pressure on the black position. There's definite compensation. So it seems, yeah, this might be a more solid alternative, g6 to h6. It's less underminable, it seems, in this particular configuration. Knight c3, black castles g4, and the bishop tucks away while it still can before g5, for example, might prevent it. It tucks away to g7 here. White castles queenside, bishop g7. So a very interesting scene is set here, opposite side castling scenery. And is this bishop just going to be permanently blunted, though, with white's seemingly very solid pawn centre? We have g5, which kind of fixes down the black pawns unless black wants to try f6 later, but it kind of would weaken the pawn structure around the king. f6 is not chosen here. In fact, a6, maybe trying to start up some queenside counterplay. We have rook h4. Now rook e8, which vacates f8. Quite critical stuff here to be able to defend h7 as needed, because white's going to pile up soon on the h-file potentially. We have c takes, e takes, bishop d3, knight f8. So it seems quite snug as a bug, snug as a rug, whatever. So anyway, it seems quite snug. And how does white break through here? We have king b1, rook b8, knight e2, bishop d7, and knight f4. So what has white's maneuver accomplished? Well, there's more pressure on d5. It seems if black has any notions of playing c5 which might extend the scope of the bishop, these are kind of being extinguished by this pressure, which seems in a way a kind of prophylaxis by Stockfish. But it also is against this pawn chain. These pawns dare not move. This pressure is critical against g6 here. It seems okay. The knight's also doing a job of protecting both g6 and h7, but you can see there's a lot of pressure, and it seems as though c5 is really out of the question. We have queen e7, queen b3, b6, king a1. So as if white's just waiting to see what black's doing. a5, the rook's double, rook b7. It seems as though black has very limited options here. Bishop b1. Then we have rook d8. The queen drops back. And now Leela actually commits to b5, which you might think, well, maybe b4 is handy. Stockfish just goes back as if to kind of say, well, I've caused the weakness. You know, your c pawn's not going anywhere because of the pressure on d5. And you just basically cause the weakness. And if you want to follow through with a4 as a tempo gainer, then that's going to be really bad. In fact, Leela played b4. Let's have a look at a4. Maybe it's not really bad. White can actually play queen b4 here. For example, this position should be a small edge for white. White looks pretty good here. You can see that clamp against the c5, so this bishop's going to be in prison for a while. And the knight can switch back to d3 if needed to protect b4. So this is quite interesting for white. But Leela doesn't go in for a4. b4 is played. Now a4. And this is quite interesting. There's a potential fantasy pin scenario. Imagine there was a knight on d5 and the bishop there. There's a fantasy pin. Now, we might dream of that scenario, but how likely is it to actually happen here in this position? This next move is interesting. Yeah, a4 is protected by the queen, and it seems black's totally in a bind of some sort here because of this pressure on the h file. Black's pieces seem basically either very defensively placed, like the knight just defending the pawn chain, d5 being held, okay, the bishop's blunted. It seems as though black's in need of some sort of liberation move. I wonder what you would play to consider liberating black's position here, and maybe increasing the potential for a pin in the position. As they say sometimes, pin and win. So black to play in this position, if I give you 5 seconds, pause the video, what would you play here? Okay, for me this is the star move of the game, c5. It's very, very liberating. Quite often liberating pawn moves capture my imagination. It increases the activity, potential activity, and the targets that the black pieces have and their potential. So immediately here, black might be playing for c4, for example. That looks very scary. So this d5 pawn can be taken two ways. In fact, knight takes d5 is played. Let's look at some alternatives. Rook c1, c4. For example, here there's just queen e8, which creates a battery against a4. And say rook takes, then bishop takes a4. This position, black just takes that knight on d5. So that's horrible. So yeah, horrible things do seem to happen allowing c4 here. This is no big deal there. Yeah, c4 is pretty painful. Also, let's have a quick look at queen takes d5. There's bishop e6 here, which hits the queen and protects that rook. If queen takes, then there's queen d7, which hits a4, threatening like a mate basically. If the bishop comes to protect a4, then rook c8 actually traps the queen in broad daylight. So that's not palatable either. D takes c5, queen takes is very pleasant, it turns out, for black after bishop takes b2 check, check, and mate, for example. So yeah, this is pretty pleasant for black. If knight takes d5 here, that nasty pin, what does white do? Say e4, then rook c7, for example, and queen takes f2, and black is better. Any check here to try and, well, it's out of the question because of the pin anyway. This black's just better here. Look at that bishop, it's been liberated. Black's pieces are fantastic there. In this line, if bishop d3 instead, rook c7, here again, anytime queen takes leaving b2, black just plays bishop takes. And here, check, bishop takes a4 is brilliant, offering the rook because of check, and then b3 will be winning because of that mate threat. Black would have to give up the queen. It's nothing for black there. So very, very interesting implications of this liberation move, very powerful liberation move, which is the reason which actually the game caught my interest really. This c5 looked a bit of a stunner to me. So white took knight takes d5, and then we have queen e8, which targets a4. So that was another great reason for this liberation move. It seems that bishop e6 is definitely on the cards now, that huge pin, which could at least get a pawn back maybe. So knight e5 is played. If knight f4, allowing bishop takes a4, this is just horrible after b3, c takes, rook b4. You can see the bishop is on fire here, and for example, queen b5, bishop takes d4. This is really nasty. Look at this, all the liabilities now. And here, rook d1, for example, black's getting an edge there. So yeah, in this variation, if knight takes instead of knight takes d4, if knight d3, knight e6 is possible. Yeah, because if knight takes a takes, that traps the queen. Let's put that on the board. Okay, so if rook h1, bishop c5, though, the queen's not very happy there. So yeah, this looks all of a sudden as if there's some issues for white to solve, basically. So knight e5 tries to solve some of them. But now, another magical move is played in this position. Can you guess? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here. And yes, it has some ingredients of liberation inside it, I believe, as implied by it. c4. Yes. Okay, now, if black had played bishop takes a4, that's only enough for equality, by the way. This kind of thing is only enough for equality. So this is the way to go. c4. Queen takes c4 is played. If knight takes c4, then bishop takes a4, hits the queen and hits the knight, actually. So black can just snap that knight off there, thanks very much. So queen takes c4. We have bishop e6, that nasty looking pin, e4. Now this does weaken that d4 pawn, which means this bishop is feeling some liberation prospects, at least, that it isn't facing a totally granite rock center anymore. And in fact now, after queen takes a4, check, the queen's come off. And now rook c7, so not immediately trying to win back this pawn. In fact, if black immediately took on d5, it runs into bishop e4. So rook c7 is an essential preparation before taking on d5. The knight's not going anywhere. It's pinned. Absolutely pinned, as opposed to just a relative pin. So bishop takes d5, wins back the pawn. And look, the bishop has been liberated now. And also there's a 2-to-1 pawn majority here. And the knight has also got a prospect of coming back in the game one day, maybe with knight e6. We have bishop e4, rook d8, rook d1. To show some of the dangers here, if this bishop was further liberated, then a4 is extremely dangerous. For example, a3, rook c3, rook takes a3, and there's coordination on a1 here. Black's getting a big advantage. So we have rook d1, knight e6. Yeah, the rook has left the h7 pressure, so the knight is free to move, and it uses its freedom to put pressure on d4 and g5. These are now looking like liabilities all of a sudden. We have bishop b1, a4, bishop d3. If d5 opening up the dark square bishop, then check, and check here is nasty. Yeah, this is looking extremely dangerous. If d6, we just take that and win the exchange. It's too dangerous for white to consider taking on a4. Yeah, it's looking like things like knight c5 check. Yeah, the king's going to get mated. So if we look at this line again, though, and look at king a1, a3, look at that. Nasty pin on b2 all of a sudden. With that bishop, white would have to give up material and is busted. So this is trying to hold things together, bishop d3. We have rook d5, though, which looks at g5 now, as well as d4. Rook e4. Now knight takes g5. Yes, this, you might be intrigued. Well, you know, why not take this pawn? There's possibilities for white to play things like bishop b5, if that was the case, using that pin. So this is nice, looking at g5, and now taking g5 out. In fact, check, and now the rook goes back here. Rook takes, knight takes. If d takes e5, then knight takes f3, check, and rook c5 is very nice for black. Black's getting a big advantage here, even though it's opposite colour bishops. Look, there's a passed h pawn over here as well. So we have knight takes e5, king g7, king b1, f6, knight c4, and now a nice little trick, knight e4. Looking at f2, so voluntarily going into the opposite coloured bishop ending. Bishop takes e4 is played. If f3, then knight f2, and then knight takes, and then rook takes, winning a piece. So this is a nice little move, knight e4. So black has turned up to be a pawn up now in the recent transactions of winning g5, a pawn up. Can Stockfish hold this position? That's the question now. Now after f5, rook c1, a couple of rooks come off. Is this enough to really win? Well, table-based rescoring was a feature of this 30 network, so it kind of tries, sort of instinctively knows which endgames to avoid, because it was all rescored in its training if it was draws or wins. Is this really enough? We've got a pass pawn on this side of the board emerging, and we've got a pawn majority on this side, and in fact this centre pawn seems as if it's given up voluntarily here. It's not even bothered to be protected. So yeah, this is already looking bad. If white's putting pawns on dark squares, this is already looking extremely bad. Not even trying, f3. It's bad news here. The king could sort of travel on the dark squares anyway and end up winning the pawns. So this looks as though it's a very bad ending. So bishop e3 giving up potentially b2, but actually d6 is thrown in before taking on b2. Yeah, this looks as though, because not just the pawn majority, but this pawn over here, this is very difficult for white to handle here. White's kind of overloaded. Black's making progress here. The king and the bishop always have to be wary of the passed b pawn in this scenario. So these pawns start being moved. The king's rushing around the place. Okay. And bishop's centralizing there. The pawns are starting to be pushed again. Some progress is being made with these pawns. Pass pawn over there now. If white had taken that, this is hopeless, yes, because look, for example, this line where the king comes in and b3 as an example, that's easily winning this. So king c2, we have h2, trying to defend against the queen for a moment, but this g3 is dropping, and it's a 3-0 pawn majority. And still, this pawn, it's not even taking it. These pawns are just crashing through now. So the pawns just need to be pushed. I think Leela's been a bit sadistic here, though. Sorry, what happened here? Bishop c3. This pawn was just given Typical Leela. Under promoting the knight cheekily. So this is a winning endgame if it's taken. With just, f4, f3, for example, it looks as though then the king can come in for f2 to stop bishop g2. There's all sorts of... It looks very easy to win. But, let's see the fine technique here. Okay, the knight is given up. And, yes. Okay, so some progress eventually is made. So that bishop's given up, and do you really want to see the rest of it? This is at move 126. It's clearly a win. Let's just whiz through the rest of it, just for the record. Yeah, if any of the king takes the pawn as queens, the king can't take the bishop. Little notes. So yes, this f pawn is actually winning here. The king can be forced out eventually when Leela gets round to it. When Leela bothers to put a king over there. Finally. Only a few more moves to go now. For some reason, the king's been put into the corner first to test the waters. It seems the queen's running around first before the king steps up. Her Majesty, His Majesty makes an entrance. Checkmate, eventually. Anyway, the major points of interest for me, the major point of interest is the liberating move c5 in this game. Once that a4 target was, made available, it seemed as though the potential pin was enough to justify the liberation move c5. It kind of loosened white's centre, and it also meant there were now targets at d4 and g5 So White's solid position was loosened through that liberation move. So maybe some interesting lessons here. We know how powerful pins are in our own games, but maybe we could reevaluate pin potential a bit more, especially if there's new targets which make pin potential a bit more worth it. Something to think about it. Think about these deep, subtle, tactical resources, which we might, reject, but they're definitely something to think about. So if you enjoyed this game video, then please click on the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at chessworld.net. Play against other YouTubers, and there's also 2 key areas now of the improve menu. You can actually check out the puzzle book on this game soon. So improve menu, there'll be puzzle books underneath puzzles. Also, you can check out, play through the variations first, maybe on the improve learn from the masters, which the puzzles are created from. You can also leave any feedback. So on this video, comments, questions, donations, see the description. Like, share, subscribe with the notification bell. Really appreciated. Thanks very much.